The 12 trucks of the Veterans Reclaim Brotherhood didn't just roll into Cedar Springs for coffee. They were a rolling fortress, and this morning, their target was a waitress named Clara, though they didn't know it yet. In the lead truck, Marcus Ace Anderson's hands tightened on the wheel. Ranger, the German shepherd beside him, let out a low growl. The dog wasn't reacting to the desert. He was reacting to the fear they were about to find. Ace, at 58, had a face that was a roadmap of a hard-lived life. His eyes, a calm and steady winter gray, held the weight of countless decisions made under pressure. People saw the broad shoulders and the stern posture and made quick, often fearful, judgments. They never saw the 20 years he'd spent as an Army combat medic. As the Oasis diner appeared on the edge of town, his medic's eye automatically scanned the building, looking for threats and exits. At Bond's Unspoken, we believe every story between a human and their animal companion deserves to be heard. If you agree, please like, share, and subscribe, and don't forget to turn on notifications so you can join us every time another Bond speaks louder than words. Ace pushed the door open, and a small brass bell jingled. The effect on the diner's occupants was instant. The low murmur of conversation cut off. All eyes were locked on the dozen large, serious-looking men filing silently through the door. Ace gave a small, neutral nod to the room and led his men to a cluster of empty booths. They settled in with a quiet efficiency. Ranger patted silently at Ace's heel before lying down under the table, his head on his paws, his watchful eyes taking in the entire room. The waitress approached. She was young, maybe 25, with hair the color of dark honey pulled back into a messy bun. Her name tag, pinned crooked to her uniform, read Clara. "Good morning," she said, and her voice was steady. But Ace's trained eye saw the finer details. The slight tremble in her fingers as she passed out the menus. "Can I start you gentlemen off with some drinks?" "Coffee would be great, thank you," Ace said, his voice a low, calm baritone. "Black for me and my friend here." As Clara turned to fetch the coffee carafe, the harsh fluorescent light caught it perfectly, a yellowing shadow along her jawline, stark against her skin, poorly concealed by makeup. When she reached up to grab mugs from a high shelf, her sleeve slid back, revealing a brutal, purple bracelet of fingerprints. Not a fall, an assault. Ace's own hand, resting on the Formica tabletop, tightened almost imperceptibly. Under the table, Ranger lifted his head and let out a low, nearly inaudible growl. Ace dropped his hand beneath the table, giving a subtle hand signal. "Stand down." The dog immediately stilled, but his alert eyes remained fixed on the waitress. Ace said nothing. Not yet. He watched as Clara moved through the diner. She smiled at customers, but he saw the way her shoulders tensed every time the front door swung open. She was living in a state of perpetual high alert, a feeling Ace and every man at his table knew all too well. She brought their coffee. As she set the heavy ceramic mug in front of Ace, he moved his hand to gently intercept hers. His touch was feather-light, the touch of a medic checking a pulse. "Miss," he said, his voice dropping so that only she could hear, "I couldn't help but notice. You look like you might have taken a bad fall. Everything okay here?" Clara's face went pale, then flushed a bright, hot red. She pulled her hand back as if she'd been branded. "I'm fine," she said, the words a rushed, panicked whisper. "Just clumsy." I walked into a door. "Doors don't usually leave fingerprints, Clara," he said, his voice even softer. "And I've been a medic long enough to know the difference between an accident and something else." Her eyes instantly glazed at the sheen of unshed tears. "Please," she breathed. "I can't. I need this job. My manager, he'll be here soon, if he sees me talking to you." The air at the table changed. The casual posture of the 11 other men shifted into something more focused. One of them, a broad-chested man named Davis, leaned forward slightly, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. "Your manager did this to you?" Clara didn't answer. She just looked down at the checker floor, her silence screaming the truth. Ace held her gaze, his own steady and calm. "What's his name?" "Jared," she whispered. "Jared Croft. Please, you have to understand. His family, they are Cedar Springs. The sheriff plays poker with his dad. I tried to tell someone once, and it got worse. A single tear escaped, tracing a path through her foundation. I'm saving up to leave. I swear I am. But it takes time, and I have nowhere else to go. Ace leaned back in the booth. He looked at his brothers. They were a band of men bound by a sworn oath to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. This was what they did. He checked his watch. It was 7:35 in the morning. When does Jared usually show up? Ace asked, his voice conversational again. Around 9, Clara whispered, to count the morning receipts. Ace nodded slowly, a plan solidifying in his mind. Okay then, he said, a faint, determined smile touching his lips. We'll just be enjoying our breakfast, nice and slow, and when Jared gets here... He let the sentence hang in the air. You don't understand, Clara insisted. He's vicious. He'll make this worse for me. He always does. Clara, Ace said, and his voice was as solid as a stone wall. Nobody is going to hurt you again. Not on our watch. You just go about your work. Let us handle this. Under the table, Ranger rested his muzzle on Ace's boot. The weight was on. The silence that settled over the Oasis diner was unlike any Clara had ever experienced. It wasn't the absence of sound, the clatter of dishes in the kitchen, the hum of the lights, the hiss of the coffee maker continued. But it was a silence of intent. The 12 veterans had become a singular entity, a quiet, watchful presence. They didn't stare, but their awareness was a physical force, a perimeter of protection around her. Clara's hands trembled as she refilled an old man's cup. The low murmur of the diner was gone, replaced by a silence of pure intent radiating from the 12 men. They hadn't moved, but the room was now theirs. The other customers, the regulars who knew the unspoken rules of Cedar Springs, felt the shift. They ate a little faster, spoke in hushed tones. An unspoken understanding was passing through the diner. Something was about to happen. The only sounds were the clatter of dishes from the kitchen and a low, continuous growl rumbling in Ranger's chest. A vibration felt through the floorboards. Ace and his men made a show of settling in. They ordered more coffee. They asked for the pie menu. Davis, the man with the scar, unfolded a local newspaper but never turned a page, his eyes constantly scanning the parking lot. Another vet, Lopez, had a phone on the table, his fingers occasionally tapping the screen. The next hour and a half stretched before them, a taut wire of anticipation. Clara moved through her routines on autopilot, her heart thumping a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Every time a car pulled into the gravel lot, her breath hitched. Every time the door jingled open, she flinched. Under Ace's table, Ranger was a model of disciplined calm, but his alertness was unmistakable. His ears swiveled at every new sound. When Clara passed by, he would thump his tail once, a soft, reassuring thud against the linoleum floor. Ace watched her closely, reading the signs of chronic stress. The way she jumped at a sudden noise, the hypervigilance in her eyes. It was all familiar script. She was living in an active war zone, and her enemy was due at 0900 hours. He caught Davis's eye across the room. A nearly imperceptible nod passed between them. The message was clear. Stay sharp. The target is inbound. The other veterans subtly adjusted their positions. One man shifted to better cover the rear exit. Another angled his body to see the front door clearly. The tension was a living thing now, coiling in the pit of Clara's stomach. She wiped down the same spot on the counter 3 times, her mind racing. What if Jared called the sheriff? What if this just made everything worse? The old, familiar despair began to creep back in. At 8:55, the sound they had all been waiting for cut through the morning calm. The aggressive roar of a high-performance engine, followed by the crunch of gravel being sprayed. A sleek, black SUV parked haphazardly in front of the diner. Jared Croft is here. The roar of his engine cut the silence. Davis caught Ace's eye across the room. A single, nearly imperceptible nod passed between them. The target is inbound. Stand ready. Clara froze, a clean mug clutched in her hand, so tightly she was surprised it didn't crack. Her face went ashen. He's here, she whispered, the words a dry, terrified rasp. The change in the veterans was immediate and electric. The pretense of casual breakfast patrons vanished. Shoulders squared, spines straightened, all casual conversation ceased. They were a unit awaiting contact. Davis folded his newspaper with a definitive snap. Lopez pocketed his phone. Ranger rose to stand at Ace's side, his body rigid, a low, continuous growl rumbling in his chest. The diner's door burst open with violent force, the little bell clanging in a frantic shriek. Jared Croft stood silhouetted in the doorway, tall and wiry. His hair was slicked back, and his mirrored sunglasses hid his eyes. "Clara, where's my morning count?" he barked, his voice slicing through the tense silence. "And what the hell is with all the trucks? I don't like this kind of—" His words died in his throat. His head swiveled, taking in the scene. His gaze swept over the 11 men, their hard eyes fixed directly on him. Finally, his attention landed on Ace, who remained seated but had turned to face him, his winter-gray eyes cold and assessing. Then his eyes dropped to Ranger. Jared's swagger faltered. He recovered quickly, puffing out his chest. "Can I help you, boys?" he asked, trying to sound tough, but a slight waver betrayed his uncertainty. It was then that Ace stood up. He did it slowly, his 6 feet 3 inches frame uncoiling to its full height. He moved toward Jared with the calm, measured pace of a man approaching a potential IED. Jared instinctively took a step back, his shoulder blades bumping against the door jamb. "We were just having breakfast," Ace said, his tone deceptively conversational. "Your waitress here, Clara. She's been wonderful. Real professional. Must be difficult for her to work with such visible injuries, though." He gestured casually toward Clara, who was rooted to the spot near the coffee station. Jared's face darkened from pale to a mottled, angry red. "That is none of your damn business," he snapped. He pointed a shaking finger at Clara. "You. In the back. Now." "I don't think so," Ace said, and his voice changed. The conversational tone was gone, replaced by a chill that could freeze desert sand. It was the voice of a man giving an order that would not be questioned. "I think Clara is going to stay right here, where we can all see her. And I think you and I are going to have a conversation about how real men are supposed to treat people." The air in the diner became brittle, as if the slightest movement could shatter it. Jared Croft was trapped, not just by Ace's physical presence, but by the unblinking gazes of the 11 other veterans and a low, steady growl from the powerful German shepherd at Ace's side. He looked like a rat in a cage, his eyes darting behind his mirrored sunglasses, searching for a weakness and finding none. "You have no idea who you're messing with," Jared blustered, trying to puff out his chest, but the effect was ruined by the way he leaned back. "My family owns this town." Ace didn't even acknowledge the threat. "My family," Ace said, his voice flat, "has served this country for combined 2 centuries. We've rebuilt communities after tornadoes and floods. We have contacts in the VA, with state prosecutors, and with more honest law enforcement than you could ever hope to intimidate." He took another step forward, now well inside Jared's personal space. "So, here is what is going to happen." He laid out the terms with cold, precise clarity. "First," Ace said, holding up one finger, "you will calculate Clara's final paycheck, effective immediately. You will add 2 months' severance pay. Every cent of the tips she's earned this morning stays with her." Jared opened his mouth to protest, but a unified, subtle shift in the posture of the men behind Ace made the words die in his throat. He snapped his mouth shut. "Second," Ace continued, a second finger joining the first, "you will sit down at that counter right now and write her a letter of recommendation. It will be glowing. It will say she is the most reliable, professional, and hard-working employee you have ever had. You will sign it, and you will date it." A faint, disbelieving whisper rustled to the other customers. Mrs. Gable had her hand over her mouth. Bob Henderson watched with his arms crossed, a grim look of satisfaction on his face. "Third," Ace said, his voice dropping to a deadly whisper as he took the final step that brought him nose to nose with Jared. "You are never going to come near her again. Not to talk, not to text, not even drive past wherever she ends up. You will erase her from your world. Permanently. If you so much as think her name, we will know, and we will come back." "And what if I don't?" Jared snarled, trying to summon his last shred of defiance. But his voice cracked on the last word. Ace didn't raise his voice. The quiet certainty was more frightening. Then we make some phone calls. We start with the state attorney general's office. We have a former JAG lawyer who loves messy cases. He gestured toward Davis, who offered a smile that was all teeth. Then we contact every news outlet from here to Phoenix. Pictures go viral. Reputations crumble. Family businesses tend to get a lot of unwanted attention. Ace let the implications hang in the silence. He could see the calculations racing behind Jared's sunglasses, the social ruin, the legal battles. "Are you following me, son?" The word son was delivered with dismissive contempt. It was a final blow. Jared's shoulders slumped in utter defeat. The fight drained out of him like air from a punctured tire, leaving behind a faint smell of cheap cologne and sweat. He gave a sullen, almost imperceptible nod. "Good," Ace said. He turned slightly, making a clear path. "The office is in the back. We'll wait." With the entire diner watching, Jared cross-slumped to the back office like a scolded dog. The silence held, then was broken by the soft sound of Mrs. Gable beginning to clap. It was joined by another pair of hands, then another, until a wave of quiet, respectful applause filled the Oasis diner. It was an acknowledgement, a collective exhale. A single, hot tear traced a path through the makeup on Clara's cheek. It was the first tear she hadn't had to hide. 10 minutes later, Jared emerged, holding a sealed envelope and a handwritten letter. He thrust them toward Ace without making eye contact. Ace took them, glanced at the check, and skimmed the letter. He gave a short, satisfied nod. "Our business here is done," Ace said to his men. They stood in unison, the movement smooth and coordinated. They left cash on the tables, more than enough. They filed out without another word, Ace and Ranger bringing up the rear. Outside, the world had transformed. The morning sun was now high and warm, bathing the dusty parking lot in a golden light that felt nothing short of miraculous to Clara. She stood by Ace's truck, clutching the envelope and the letter. Clara's fingers clenched around the envelope, the paper crinkling in her grasp. She looked from it to the diner, and for the first time, her shoulders didn't hunch under an invisible weight. Tears streamed down her face, but they were tears of cathartic release. "I can't believe you did that," she stammered, her body trembling not from fear, but from the sheer shock of her liberation. No one has ever... I didn't think anyone would ever see..." Her words failed her. "Everyone deserves someone in their corner, Clara," Ace said, his voice returning to its gentle quality. He leaned against the truck, giving her space. Ranger, sensing the shift, nudged her hand with his wet nose, then leaned his full weight against her leg. She looked from the dog to the man, to the line of idling trucks. These strangers had seen the truth she'd worked so hard to hide. They had not just seen her bruises. They had seen her. "Now," Ace said, breaking the silence gently, "you've got a decision to make. You can stay in Cedar Springs. That check and that letter give you options. Or," he paused, "you can ride with us to Prescott. We know a woman there, a former Marine named Gwen McCormick. She runs a diner called the Mess Hall. She's tough, she's fair, and she's always looking for reliable help. You'd have a clean slate, a real fresh start." Clara's gaze drifted back toward the Oasis diner. Through the window, she could see the familiar red vinyl booths, the long chrome counter, the place that had been her prison. She thought of the back office, the walk-in freezer, the constant anxiety. Then she looked at the line of trucks, at these men who had become her unlikely cavalry. The fear in her eyes was being evicted by a dawning, fierce determination. The choice was terrifying, but for the first time, it was her choice. She wasn't running away in the dead of night. She was being offered a guided exit. She looked from the dilapidated duplex to the line of idling trucks. "I'll need to pack," she said, her voice gaining a strength and clarity it hadn't held in years. The decision was made. Ace nodded, a faint smile touching the corners of his eyes. "We'll wait." The drive to her small, rented room was silent but for the rumble of the engine. Clara directed him to a dilapidated duplex. She was inside for less than 10 minutes, emerging with a single worn duffel bag. It was a pitifully small representation of a life. As she climbed back into the truck, she didn't look back. She was done with this town. Ranger rested his head on her lap for the short drive back with the convoy. A quiet flurry of activity ensued. Lopez was on his phone. Davis approached Clara's window. "We'll be your escort," he said, his voice gruff but kind. "We ride in formation. You're in the center, with Ace. No one gets to you. You understand?" Clara nodded, overwhelmed by the operational thoroughness. They weren't just giving her a ride. They were conducting a secure extraction. As the trucks pulled out onto the open highway, a profound sense of safety began to wrap around her. She was in the heart of a moving fortress. She watched the town limit sign disappear in the side mirror, and she let out a breath she felt like she'd been holding for 2 years. She was out. She was free. The desert highway stretched ahead, a blank slate leading to a future she was finally allowed to imagine. The convoy of trucks didn't just drive. They processed. They moved with a disciplined, rolling rhythm down the highway, leaving Cedar Springs behind. Clara sat in the passenger seat of Ace's F-250, her duffel bag behind her, Ranger a warm barrier between her and the world. She stared out the window, watching the oppressive landscape blur and vanish. It felt like a surgical excision, cutting a tumor from her life. She watched the other trucks in the side mirror, a protective steel cordon around Ace's vehicle. These men, whose names she was only just learning, had dismantled the prison of her life in under 2 hours. The simplicity of their power left her in a state of awed silence. The desert highway unspooled before them. The silence in the cab was peaceful. Ace didn't press her with questions. He just drove, one hand on the wheel, the other occasionally dropping to scratch behind Ranger's ears. After about an hour, they pulled into a sprawling truck stop to refuel. The moment the trucks rolled to a stop, the veterans disembarked with quiet efficiency. Davis and Jenkins did a slow, casual perimeter walk, their eyes constantly scanning the lot, while Lopez prepaid for fuel inside. It wasn't a stop. It was a security checkpoint. Lopez emerged with bottles of cold water and a bag of beef jerky, which he handed to Clara. "For the road," he said with a quick smile. Ace pumped the gas, his own gaze sweeping the lot. They were securing the area. Clara watched it all, the military precision both intimidating and deeply comforting. She was no longer a person. She was a valuable asset being transported under guard. Back on the road, Ace finally broke the comfortable silence. "The woman we're going to see in Prescott is named Gwen McCormick," he said. "Served 2 tours as a Marine Corps cook. Came home, used her benefits to buy a place called a mess hall. Best breakfast skillet you'll ever eat. She doesn't tolerate any nonsense, but she's loyal to her people. You'll be safe there." Clara nodded. "Thank you," she said. "I don't know how I can ever repay you. All of you." Ace shook his head slowly. "You don't. That's not how this works. We see someone who needs a hand up, and we offer it. You repay it by living well, by taking this chance. That's all the thanks we need." The simplicity of his moral arithmetic was breathtaking. In her world, every kindness had a hidden price tag. This was different. This was pure. They stopped once more at a scenic overlook. The air was cleaner, cooler. The veterans got out, stretching their legs, but their watchfulness never ceased. Clara stood by the guardrail. Ranger stood beside her, his shoulder pressed against her leg. Davis walked over and stood next to her. "Big country," he grunted. "Too big sometimes," Clara whispered. "Nah," Davis said. "You're part of the convoy now, Clara. We look after our own. Just follow Ace's taillights." He didn't wait for a reply, just moved off to check on one of the other trucks. As they crested the final hill, the city of Prescott lay spread out in the valley below, nestled among the pines. It looked peaceful, solid. Ace pointed toward a modest, sturdy-looking building on the near edge of town, a sign reading the mess hall out front. A woman with a severe gray buzz cut was waiting outside, her arms crossed. "This is it," Ace said, pulling into the lot. "Your new beginning." Clara took a deep, shuddering breath, her heart pounding not with terror, but with a nervous, exhilarating hope. Ranger nudged her hand with his wet nose. She was no longer a victim waiting for a rescue. She was a survivor, reporting for duty. Gwen McCormick was a woman who looked like she could stop a charging bull with a single glance. Her handshake was firm. Her gaze was direct, and when she looked at Clara, it felt less like a greeting and more like an assessment. She saw past the tremble in Clara's hands, past the fading yellow bruise on her jaw, and seemed to be measuring the metal of the person underneath. "Ace called ahead," Gwen said, her voice a gravelly alto that brooked no nonsense. "Told me I was getting a good one." Gwen's gaze was a physical weight. "Ace says you're a fighter," she stated. "You ready to prove him, right?" She didn't wait for an answer. "Let's get you settled." She led Clara up a narrow, clean staircase to a small studio apartment above the diner. It was simple: a bed with a plain but sturdy frame, a dresser, a small kitchenette, and a private bathroom. The lock on the door was a heavy, new deadbolt. The window looked out over a quiet, sun-drenched alley. These were not accidents. They were deliberate provisions of safety, and Clara felt their significance deep in her bones. "Take the day. Get your bearings," Gwen said, handing her a key. "We'll talk tomorrow about your schedule. The pay is fair, the tips are good, and nobody here will ever lay a hand on you. That's a promise." With a final, solid nod, she left Clara alone. Clara sat on the edge of the bed, the mattress firm and supportive. She ran her fingers over the clean, coarse weave of the bedspread. Ranger, who had followed them up with Ace's quiet permission, sat by the door, watching her with his calm, intelligent eyes. He was a living, breathing security system. Downstairs, Ace and his men were saying their goodbyes to Gwen. The exchange was brief. "You did good, Ace," Gwen said, clapping him on the shoulder. "We'll take it from here." The weight of the mission was being passed seamlessly from one set of capable hands to another. Ace nodded. His job was done. Before he left, Ace walked back to his truck and pulled a small, worn teddy bear from his duffel bag. He handed it to Clara through the open window of her apartment. "For the first night in a new place," he said simply, "sometimes it helps to have something to hold on to." It was a gesture so profoundly at odds with his rugged exterior that it finally broke the last of Clara's emotional dams. She cried, but they were cleansing tears. She clutched the bear. The veterans' trucks rumbled to life and pulled out a lot, heading east. Clara stood at her window, watching them until they were specks on the horizon. Ranger remained sitting by her door, on duty. She was alone, but for the first time in years, she did not feel lonely. She felt posted, guarded. That evening, as the sun set behind the mountains, a knock came at her door. It was Gwen, holding 2 plates laden with food. "Figured you might be hungry," she said, stepping inside. She set the plates on the small table. It was the famous breakfast skillet, and it smelled like heaven. They ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes. Finally, Gwen put her fork down. "I'm not going to ask you for your story," she said, her eyes holding Clara's. "You can tell me pieces of it when you're ready, or you can never tell me at all. It doesn't matter to me. What matters is that you're here now. You show up on time, you do honest work, and you treat people with respect. That's all I require. The rest," she gestured around the small, safe room, "the rest is yours to rebuild." In that moment, Clara understood that her fresh start wasn't just a change of location. It was a change of constitution. The rules here were clear, fair, and enforced by a woman who was a force of nature. The fear began to recede with a quiet, steady exhale. "Thank you," Clara said, and this time the words felt different. They weren't laden with the weight of a debt. They were simply an acknowledgement of a new reality. "I'll be ready to work tomorrow." Gwen gave a single, sharp nod of approval. "I know you will." The first shift at the mess hall began at 5:30 a.m. in a whirlwind of controlled chaos. The air was thick with the smell of frying bacon, brewing coffee, and yeast from the proofing bread. Clara, dressed in a clean, new apron provided by Gwen, felt a familiar nervous flutter in her stomach. But it was different this time. It was the anxiety of a new job, not the terror of a predator's domain. Gwen introduced her to the rest of the small, tight-knit staff with brisk introductions. There was Bear, the massive, silent short-order cook, who communicated in grunts and a flawless culinary rhythm. There was Sarah, a waitress in her 50s with kind eyes, and Maria, a college student. There were no probing questions, no sidelong glances at the faint remnant of a bruise. She was simply Clara, the new hire. The first test came an hour into the breakfast rush. A burly trucker, impatient and loud, slammed his hand on the counter when his order was taking too long. "Hey, I don't have all day. What's the holdup back there?" The sound, the sudden aggression, sent a jolt of pure, conditioned fear through Clara's system. Her hands trembled, sloshing coffee from the pot onto the floor. She froze, her heart hammering, waiting for the explosion. But the explosion never came. Bear turned from the grill, the sizzle of bacon dying as he fixed the man with a dead-eyed stare. "You'll get it when it's done," he said, his voice low enough to cut through the noise. The trucker shrank back, the smell of aggressive sweat suddenly overpowered by frying grease. Then Gwen was there, not with anger but with a clean towel. "Happens to everyone," she said, matter-of-fact, as she helped mop up the spill. "Don't let the customers get under your skin. You're doing fine." It was a minor incident, but for Clara, it was a revelation. In her old life, a mistake like that would have been a capital offense. Here, it was just a spilled coffee. Handled, forgotten. The world did not end. She learned the rhythms of the diner. There was Mr. Henderson, who came in every day at 7:15. There was a group of construction workers. She learned that Bear liked his coffee left alone, and that Gwen kept a secret stash of chocolate bars. In the afternoons, after the lunch rush, she began her business management class. Sitting in the lecture hall, she felt a flicker of imposter syndrome, but was quickly extinguished by a fierce, new determination. This wasn't a dream anymore. It was a plan. One evening, as she was closing up, a man who reminded her jarringly of Jared came in and sat at the counter. Her heart immediately launched into a frantic rhythm. Her breath hitched. But before the old fear could fully take hold, Bear was there. He didn't say a word. He just began polishing a glass, his massive frame leaning casually between Clara and the man. Gwen emerged from the kitchen, her gaze sharp. The man, feeling the sudden, palpable shift, simply ordered a coffee to go, paid, and left. It was in that moment that Clara truly, fully understood the invisible shield that now surrounded her. She wasn't just safe because Jared was gone. She was safe because she was now part of a new family. She looked at Bear and Gwen and nodded. They nodded back. Nothing more needed to be said. That night, lying in her bed, she held the teddy bear Ace had given her and listened to the comforting sounds of the diner being cleaned below. The scent of disinfectant and fresh coffee grounds seeped up through the floorboards. It was a smell of safety. It was a smell of a future she was finally allowed to own. She fell asleep with a genuine smile on her face, the first in years, knowing that tomorrow was not something to be feared, but to be built. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, the diner was quiet. Clara was wiping down a table when a customer in a booth snapped his fingers at her. "Hey, this soup is cold, and I asked for no onions. Take it back." A year ago, the sharp tone would have made her flinch. Now, Clara simply nodded, her expression calm. "I'm sorry about that, sir. Let me get that fixed for you right away." She picked up the bowl, walked to the kitchen window, and said to Bear, "Table 4, split pea, no onions, needs to be hot." Bear gave a grunt and turned to the stove. Clara then grabbed a fresh roll and butter, returned to the table, and set them down. "Here's something to start with, on the house. Your new bowl will be out in 2 minutes." She didn't wait for a reply, moving smoothly to the next table to clear it. The man watched her, his irritation fading into surprise. Clara's movements were efficient, unshaken. She had handled the complaint without a tremor. She was no longer playing the part of a waitress. She was a good one. Her world, once so terrifyingly small, was expanding. After her shift, her business management class was challenging, but she devoured the textbooks. The concepts of profit margins and marketing strategies were puzzles she was eager to solve. For the first time, She was building something for herself, and the blueprint was entirely her own. Ranger remained her constant shadow. He had a designated bed behind the counter. He was a silent partner in her recovery. On days when a loud noise caused a flicker of the old fear, Ranger would shift his weight, pressing his shoulder against her leg, a grounding presence. Gwen was at the counter, going over invoices, her reading glasses perched on her nose. "Clara," Gwen said, not looking up, "I'm going to need someone to handle the weekly supply order starting next month. Vendor calls, inventory checked, the works. You interested?" Clara stopped, the damp cloth frozen in her hand. This wasn't just bussing tables. This was responsibility. "Trust." "Me?" she asked. "Who else?" Gwen replied, looking over her glasses. "You're organized, you're reliable, and you're not afraid of numbers. It comes with a small pay bump. Consider a promotion." A promotion. The word landed in Clara's chest like a warm, glowing stone. In her old life, it was a myth. Here, it was a brick laid in the path of her future. Yes, I'm interested," Clara said, her voice firming. "Thank you, Gwen." "Don't thank me. Earn it," Gwen said, but the slight crinkle at the corners of her eyes took the sting out. That evening, after class, she sat at her table, her textbook open next to a notepad where she was already sketching out ideas for streamlining inventory. Ranger lay at her feet. She looked around the room, at the clean walls, the locked door, the teddy bear on her pillow. She thought of the promotion, of the A she'd just received. A memory surfaced, Jared's face, sneering. "You'll never be anything without me. You're nothing." For years, those words had been poison. But now, looking at the evidence of her own life, the words had lost their power. They were just the empty threats of a small, cruel man. She wasn't nothing. She was a student, a waitress, an inventory manager, a survivor. The narrative of her life was no longer being written by her fear, but by her own choices, supported by people who believed in her. She picked up her pen, a new sense of purpose flowing through her. The rain had stopped, and a sliver of moonlight peeked through her window. She had work to do. She had a life to build. And for the first time, she knew she was capable of building it. The change in Cedar Springs was subtle at first, like a shift in the desert wind. It began with a story whispered over fences and across grocery store aisles. The story of the dozen quiet veterans and the German shepherd who had rolled into town, faced down Jared Croft, and vanished with Clara like ghosts at dawn. The facts were hazy, but the result was clear. Jared had been humiliated, and Clara was gone, freed. The story spread, gaining momentum and weight with each telling. It became a modern folk tale, a crack in the unbreakable wall of the Croft family's impunity. Old Mrs. Gable now spoke openly in the post office about the fear in Jared's eyes. Bob Henderson would tell customers, with a grim smile, that it was about time. The Crofts, sensing the change, retreated. Jared was sent to manage a family enterprise in another state. The sheriff found himself facing unexpected questions from the local newspaper. The invisible armor of influence was now pitted and tarnished. Meanwhile, at the mess hall, Clara was thriving. The promotion had given her a new sense of ownership. She found a discrepancy in the potato delivery invoice, saving Gwen money. She reorganized the dry storage, creating a system so efficient that Bear actually grunted, "Good." One afternoon, a woman with a nervous demeanor and a hastily applied scarf covering a swollen cheekbone came into the diner. She didn't order food. She asked for Clara by name. Clara approached the booth, her heart thudding. "Are you the one?" the woman whispered, her eyes darting around. "The one they helped? The bikers?" "They were veterans," Clara corrected gently, sitting down. Ranger settled at Clara's feet. The woman's name was Lisa. She was from a town 2 hours away. She'd heard the story. She had a duffel bag in her car and $200 to her name. "I don't know where to go," she confessed, her voice breaking. I heard you made it out." Clara felt the world tilt on its axis. She was no longer just a person who'd been saved. She was now a symbol, a beacon for someone else lost in the same dark sea. The responsibility was terrifying and immense. Clara didn't hesitate. "Gwen," she called out, her voice steady. "We need your help." Gwen emerged from the kitchen, took one look at Lisa, and understood everything. "Back booth is free," she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. "I'll get coffee. Clara, get the number for the safe house in Flagstaff." Clara moved with a purpose she hadn't known she possessed. She wasn't just following orders. She was orchestrating a rescue. She called the number the Brotherhood had left her. She helped Lisa pack her car with food. She gave her the teddy bear Ace had given her. "For the first night in a new place," she said, echoing his words. As Lisa's car pulled away, Clara stood beside Gwen in the parking lot. The sun was setting. "You did good, kid," Gwen said, her voice rough with emotion. "It's what they did for me," Clara replied, watching the taillights disappear. "I just pass it on." In that moment, Clara understood the true ripple effect power of the Brotherhood's mission. They hadn't just saved one waitress. They had created a new link in a chain of hope. By standing up for her, they had empowered her to stand up for someone else. The circle of protection was expanding, and she was now a part of its unbreakable wall. The letter arrived at the Brotherhood's shared P.O. box 3 months to the day after they had left Clara in Prescott. It was a plain white envelope, but the return address, the Mess Hall, Prescott, made Ace's heart lift. Inside, he found a single photograph and a folded note. The photo showed Clara standing in front of the mess hall. She wore a clean apron and a smile that was both genuine and unguarded, reaching all the way to her eyes, which held a light that had been brutally extinguished when he'd first met her. The bruises were gone, not just from her skin, but from her very posture. She stood straight, her shoulders back. She looked, for the first time, like a woman who owned her own future. Ace unfolded the letter. The handwriting was neat. "Dear Ace, I hope this letter finds you and Ranger well. I'm writing from Prescott, where the air is clear and the people are kind. I've been working for Gwen, and she's been every bit the mentor you said she would be. I'm also taking night classes in business management. It's hard, but it's the good kind of hard, the kind that builds you up instead of tearing you down. I don't think I can ever fully explain what you and the Brotherhood did for me. You didn't just stop a bad man on one morning. You gave me back my life. You saw me when I had become invisible to everyone, even to myself. You reminded me that kindness isn't a weakness, and that strength isn't about being the loudest or the cruelest. It's about having the courage to stand up for what's right. Thank you for seeing me. Thank you for reminding me that I mattered. You changed my life. With eternal gratitude." Clara. Ace read the letter twice, a profound sense of satisfaction settling in his chest, warm and solid. This was why they did it. He walked over to the large cork bulletin board that dominated one wall of their garage. It was a board of faces. Dozens of photographs were pinned there, each one a story. This was their real mission log. He carefully pinned Clara's photo to the center of the board, the cork brittle under his thumb. Ranger, watching him, let out a soft woof and leaned his heavy weight against Ace's leg. Later that evening, the Brotherhood gathered around a fire pit. Davis sipped his beer, saw the new photo on the board, the waitress from Cedar Springs. Ace nodded. "She's in Prescott, working for Gwen, taking classes." A ripple of quiet, proud smiles moved through the group. Lopez pulled out his phone. "Speaking of Cedar Springs," he said, "heard through the grapevine that Jared Croft decided to take a sudden, extended vacation out of state. Apparently, the family business started getting a lot of unwelcome scrutiny after our visit. The news was met with grim nods, not cheers. They hadn't sought to destroy the young man, only to stop him and create consequences. The ripple effects were a natural outcome. As the fire crackled, Ace felt the familiar pull to road. There were always more people who needed a hand up. He thought of Clara's smile in the photograph, a stark contrast to the terrified woman in the diner. He thought away one moment of decisive action could send out ripples that changed the course of a life forever. It was a powerful reminder that they weren't just solving problems. They were planting seeds of hope in barren soil, and those seeds were now beginning to bloom in ways they might never fully see. Big Ace Anderson smiled. took a long drink of his coffee, and knew they would ride again tomorrow. There were more roads to travel, more people who needed someone to stand up for them. And as long as there were, the Veterans Reclaim Brotherhood would be there, engines rumbling, ready to answer the call. The mission board in the garage was more than a collection of photographs. It was a living, breathing heart of the Veterans Reclaim Brotherhood. 2 days after Clara's photo was pinned to its center, a new notice went up, a simple, typed sheet with a grainy image printed from a social media post. It showed a faded sign for a family-run auto shop in a struggling town 200 miles north. The caption, written by a local pastor, was a quiet plea. The Miller family garage, a town fixture for 40 years, is facing closure. Elderly owner, Arthur Miller, a Vietnam vet, is battling illness. Local conglomerate Knight Automotive is using predatory tactics to force a sale. They're tearing the heart out of our main street. Ace called a meeting. The men gathered, their faces grim. This was their kind of fight, not against a single bully in a diner, but against a faceless corporation preying on the vulnerable. We have a new objective. Ace began, tapping the map at the town of Rock Creek. The target is Knight Automotive's local representative, a man named Carl Durning. The mission, ensure the Miller family retains their business and their dignity. He looked at his men. This isn't a diner. We can't intimidate a corporation. We have to outmaneuver them. The planning began with quiet efficiency. Lopez pulled corporate records. Davis started drafting letters to state representatives. Others coordinated with the local pastor. But this mission required a different kind of force. It wasn't about physical confrontation. It was about economic and psychological warfare. They would use the system against those who abused it. 3 days later, a convoy rolled out to Rock Creek. They didn't head to a diner. They went directly to Miller's Auto, a modest garage with 2 service bays, its paint faded by sun and time. Arthur Miller was a thin, stooped man in his late 70s, his eyes clouded with pain and worry. He watched the trucks pull up with a look of weary resignation, expecting more pressure. But when Ace stepped out, followed by Ranger, and introduced the Brotherhood as allies, the old man's hands began to shake with hope. "We've heard you're having some trouble with your competitors, Mr. Miller," Ace said, his voice respectful. "We'd like to offer our assistance." Inside the office, over cups of weak coffee, Arthur told him everything. The lowball offers, the mysterious vandalism, the threatening calls. The pressure was relentless. The Brotherhood's plan was already in motion. As Arthur spoke, Lopez was setting up a secure Wi-Fi hotspot. Other veterans were outside, assessing equipment and starting on maintenance, their presence a clear signal. This garage is under new protection. The old man's hands shook, but he looked Ace in the eye. "I've got nothing left to lose," Arthur whispered. "Let's fight." The next morning, Carl Durning, a man in an expensive suit, arrived in his glossy company car. He expected to find a broken old man ready to sign. Instead, he found the garage bustling. He found Ace waiting for him, Ranger at his heel. "Can I help you?" Ace asked, his tone neutral. Durning tried to bluster. "I have a meeting with Mr. Miller, a private business matter." "I'm his business consultant now," Ace said, handing Durning a thick envelope. "This contains a cease and desist letter, a preliminary injunction, and a dossier of evidence for the state's Consumer Protection Bureau and the IRS. I'd advise you to take it back to your superiors. The Millers are not for sale." Durning's face went from smug to ashen as he flipped through the pages. The Brotherhood hadn't come with fists. They had come with paperwork, a far more potent weapon. He looked at the determined faces, at Ranger, and at Arthur Miller, now standing straight. He left without another word. The battle for Miller's Auto wasn't won in a day, but the first decisive shot had been fired. The Brotherhood had proven that their strength wasn't just in their muscles, but in their minds, their integrity, and their unwavering resolve to fight for what was right on any battlefield. The victory at Miller's Auto was not a single, decisive battle, but a sustained campaign of quiet resistance. The Brotherhood didn't leave Rock Creek after Durning's retreat. They dug in, becoming a temporary part of the town's fabric. Some of the men helped repaint the garage's faded exterior, the fresh coat of white standing as a bold declaration of defiance. Others repaired the minor vandalism on customers' cars, slashed tires, and scratch paint that mysteriously stopped occurring. Lopez continued his digital siege, unearthing a trail of shady business practices. Davis's formally worded letters began landing on the desks of regulators. The local news ran a story about the veteran guardians who had arrived to help one of their own. The most powerful weapon, however, was the community itself. Emboldened by the Brotherhood's presence, other small business owners began speaking out about the pressure they had faced. The town, which had felt powerless, found its collective voice. A shop local support a vet campaign sprouted overnight. Business at Miller's Auto didn't just recover. It boomed, fueled by town pride and solidarity. Ace watched it all unfold, a cup of coffee in his hand, Ranger at his feet. This was the other side of their mission. Not just stopping a threat, but fostering the strength for a community to protect itself long after they were gone. Arthur Miller, moving with less pain and more purpose, clapped Ace on the shoulder. "You boys, you didn't just save my business. You reminded this whole town what we're made of." Back in Prescott, Clara's transformation continued to deepen. The success of helping Lisa had ignited a new sense of agency. She wasn't just building a life for herself. She was becoming a pillar in someone else's. She started a small, informal support group for women in transition, meeting once a week in a back booth after hours. She didn't have professional training, but she had the one qualification that mattered. She understood. Gwen watched this development with a critical but approving eye. She began teaching Clara the books, showing her the real financial guts of the business. Clara was no longer just an employee. She was an apprentice, being groomed. One evening, as Clara was balancing the day's receipts, Gwen leaned against the counter. "You know," she said casually, "I'm not getting any younger. This place needs someone with a head for numbers and a heart for people. Someone who knows what it's like to need a second chance." She didn't say anything more. The offer hung in the air, immense and glorious. Clara felt the weight of it, the trust. It was a future she had never dared to imagine. Not just a job, but a legacy. I'll think about it," she managed to say. "Good," Gwen replied. "That's the first step." Weeks turned into a month. The situation in Rock Creek stabilized. Knight Automotive, facing a public relations nightmare and mounting legal pressure, formally withdrew their offer. The Brotherhood's work was done. They had planted a flag, and the town had rallied around it. As the trucks were packed to leave, the entire town turned out to see them off. There were handshakes, hugs, and a handmade pie for the road. Arthur Miller gripped Ace's hand, his eyes shining. "You tell that waitress," he said, his voice thick, "that her story, it gave us the courage to write our own." The word struck Ace. He had seen the direct results of their actions, but he hadn't fully grasped the intangible, propagating power of their mission. One act of courage had not just saved one person. It had become a story that empowered a town, which would, in turn, inspire others. The ripples were moving outward in ways he could never track. He looked at his brothers, at the faces of the people they had helped, and then down at Ranger. They were more than a group of veterans. They were catalysts, and their work was infinitely more far-reaching than he had ever dreamed. The return to their home base was always a time of decompression. The trucks were washed and serviced. The men scattered, but the connection between them hummed with a low, constant energy. Ace stood in the garage, alone but for Ranger. His eyes traveled over the mission board. Clara's smiling face was now flanked by a new photo. Arthur Miller, standing proudly in front of his freshly painted garage, surrounded by the people of Rock Creek. He thought about Arthur's words. "You tell that waitress. Her story gave us the courage to write our own." It was a profound truth. The Brotherhood provided the strength to shield, but it was a story of survival that became the sword for others. This line of thought was interrupted by a secure video call from Gwen. Her face was tight with concern. "Ace," she said, "we've got a situation. It's Clara." A cold knot tightened in Ace's stomach. "Is she hurt?" "No, nothing like that. She's safe. It's psychological." Gwen's voice was low. 1 year to the day after they rolled out of Cedar Springs, a letter arrived from her mother, reopening old wounds. She didn't even mention the anniversary, but I can see it. She's jumping at shadows again. The confidence is gone. She looks like the girl I met a year ago. Ace understood. Anniversaries were landmines for trauma. The body remembers what the mind tries to forget. What do you need? I need you to talk to her, Gwen said. Not me, not a therapist. You're the one who saw her at her worst and showed her a way out. She needs a reminder from the source. The next morning, Ace and Ranger were back on the road to a rescue of the spirit they had already once saved. When they pulled up to the mess hall, Clara was wiping down a table. She saw them and froze, the cloth falling from her hand. Her face was pale, the shadows back under her eyes. She looked heartbreakingly like she had a year ago. Ace walked in, Ranger at his heel. He didn't say a word. He just walked up to her and opened his arms. Clara stood rigid, and then she broke. She collapsed into his embrace, sobbing. I thought I was past this, she choked out. I thought I was strong now. Being strong doesn't mean you don't have scars, Ace said, his voice steady. Ace's voice was low and steady. The scar isn't the wound, Clara. It's the proof you healed. And you're still here. Ranger nudged her hand, and she dropped to her knees, burying her face in the dog's fur. The three of them stayed like that for a long time. Later, over coffee, Clara whispered, the memories, they just came back. The smell of Jared's cologne on a customer yesterday. The sound of a truck door slamming. It all just flooded back. It will, Ace nodded. It probably will again. But each time, the floodwaters recede a little faster. Each time, you're standing on higher ground. He gestured around the diner. Look at what you've built, Clara. This is your high ground. This is your proof that you won. She followed his gaze, taking in clean tables, the stock supplies, the trust. She took a deep breath, and some of the tension left her shoulders. The ghost had been faced, and it had lost a little more power. This, Ace realized, was another facet of their mission they had never formally acknowledged. Follow-up care. The battle wasn't always won in a single, dramatic stand. Sometimes, the most important fights were the quiet, recurring ones fought in a landscape of memory, and they were a brotherhood for those battles. 2. Ace stayed in Prescott for 3 days. They weren't days of dramatic intervention, but of quiet reinforcement. He didn't coddle Clara. He worked alongside her. He helped with the heavy supply deliveries, fixed a stubborn hinge on the diner's back door, and sat in the corner booth with Ranger, a steady, calming presence. His mere existence in her new space was a living reminder that the world was a place to be shaped, not feared. On the second day, he asked her to show him her business management textbooks. He paged through them, not with the eye of a scholar, but of a strategist. Logistics, he said, tapping a chapter. That's what we do. We're a rapid response logistics unit for people in crisis. You're learning the civilian version. The reframing was a revelation to Clara. Her studies weren't just about running a diner. They were about understanding the architecture of support. On the morning of the third day, as Ace prepared to leave, Clara approached him. Her posture was different again, the temporary slump of fear replaced by a renewed, stronger resolve. I want to help, she said, her voice clear. Not just here. I want to help you with the Brotherhood. Ace looked at her. It's not a charity. It's dangerous. It's unpredictable. I know, she replied. I'm not asking to ride along, but you have a logistics problem. She led him to her apartment above the diner, where she had set up 2 monitors. She sat down and her fingers flew over the keyboard. A secure, encrypted dashboard came to life. Look, she said, pulling up a map. These are the confirmed safe houses in our network. Gwen's, the auto shop in Nevada, the motel in New Mexico. Here's the encrypted request portal I built, live and hidden. It filters and flags urgent cases. I can vet, coordinate, and route from right here. I can be your mission control. As she laid out her plan, Ace realized she wasn't offering out of debt. She was enlisting. The rescued was joining the rescue. Ace was silent for a long moment, studying her. He saw the intelligence in her eyes, the fierce determination, and the deep, hard-won empathy. She was proposing to become the central nervous system for their scattered, muscular heart. It was a monumental offer. It would formalize their operations, expand their reach, and allow them to help more people more efficiently. "Are you sure?" he asked finally. "This would mean living in two worlds. The safe, solid one you've built here, and the messy, unpredictable one we operate in." Clara glanced over at Gwen, who was watching from the counter, arms crossed, a look of grim pride. Then she looked back at Ace. "The two worlds are the same. You taught me that. Safety isn't a place. It's a network. I'm already part of it. Let me make it stronger." Ace extended his hand. "Welcome to the Brotherhood, Clara." It wasn't a handshake between a savior and the saved. It was a pact between two soldiers. Ranger let out a soft woof and nudged both their hands. As Ace and Ranger drove away, the future of the Veterans Reclaim Brotherhood had fundamentally shifted. They were no longer just a mobile response unit. They were on the verge of becoming something more organized, more connected, more powerful. Their greatest success story was now their chief architect. The rescued had joined the rescue. 3 months later, the transformation was undeniable. The Veterans Reclaim Brotherhood was no longer just a convoy of trucks. It was a network. From her apartment above the mess hall, Clara had become mission control. The anonymous portal she built allowed pleas for help to find them from places they'd never have known about. A single mother being harassed by a slumlord, a family farm being strong-armed. Clara vetted each request with a cold, sharp eye. She coordinated with a growing list of safe harbor businesses, all willing to be waypoints on the Underground Railroad of Hope. The change in their efficacy was staggering. When Ace and his men rolled into a town now, they didn't just have muscle and principle, they had dossiers. They had legal precedents, digital evidence, and a safe exit strategy already mapped out. They were no longer just reacting to injustice. They were systematically dismantling it. One evening, a report crossed Clara's desk from a newspaper in Cedar Springs. Jared Cross' family had sold the Oasis Diner. The new owners had repainted it and changed the menu. Clara read the article once, then closed the tab. It was an obituary for a ghost that no longer haunted her. She stood and walked to her window. Ranger leaned against her. She was no longer the woman in the photograph Ace had pinned to his board. She was the one who decided which photographs got to be taken. Out on the road, Ace felt the shift in his bones. The weight was different, lighter in some ways, more complex in others. He stood by his truck at a rest stop, looking at a photo Clara had sent. It was a screenshot from Lisa, the woman Clara had helped. She was safe, working at a library, and had enrolled in a GED program. Another ripple. Another life changed. Davis walked up beside him. "The kid's good." "The best," Ace agreed. "That portal of hers, it's a game changer. We can't keep up with the old, everyone rolls out model." Ace nodded. "We adapt. We always have. We'll run smaller, specialized teams. Coordinate through her." It was the next evolution. They were scaling up, and Clara was a linchpin. The scared waitress was now the strategic commander of a growing force for good. That night, under a canopy of endless stars, Ace sat by a small fire, Ranger at his side. He thought about the journey, from finding Clara in that diner to the intricate network they were building. The Brotherhood's purpose had crystallized. They were not just protectors. They were architects. He pulled out his phone and typed a message to Clara. New request. Northern Arizona. A teacher being fired for standing up for a student. Sending details. Let's build a response. He received an immediate reply. Already on it. Pulling school board records now. Safe house identified. Go/no-go by 0800. Welcome home, Ace. Ace smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes. He looked down at Ranger. Ready to go home, boy? Ranger thumped his tail. Ace kicked dirt over the fire. He looked at the stars. The engine was built. The next mission was waiting. But what they didn't know was that their new visibility was about to attract a new, more dangerous kind of enemy. If stories like this touch your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Bonds Unspoken. Every click helps us share more incredible moments that celebrate the bond between humans and animals. And be sure to turn on the notification bell so you never miss a story that reminds us what true loyalty feels like.